Good afternoon, councillors. Welcome to our council meeting of Wednesday, the 22nd of June 2022. Welcome staff, members of the public and the press that are here with us today. We have no apologies, but just to note that Councillors Brannigan and Isaacs are on Zoom. We have one public participation, which we'll get to shortly. Are there any late items? Any declarations of interest? Can we move to the confirmation of the minutes for the council meeting of the 8th of June? And can I confirm that those are a true and correct record? Mover and seconded, please. Councillor Allen. Seconded by me. Okay, all those in favour? Against? Carried, thank you. And the meeting minutes of the in-committee meeting held on the 8th of June, can I move that those are a true and correct record? Seconded, Councillor Jennings. All those in favour? Thank you. Any announcements? Thank you. Okay, Mr. Lindsay, welcome to the table.
Thank you, Your Worship. Councillors, Chief Executive members. I'm not an accountant, and so I need some help to understand. The matter of the amount of money that you're going to be spending next year, 2,072 million, receiving 69 million, which is wonderful. But I'm specifically then looking at the figures that you put on page 5 for the solid waste. Now, you've given it some indication that the leachate, the capping will occur, and there's some leachate remediation that's going to go on there. But those I don't think are the full figures, because at a recent meeting, $1.9 million was suggested as the cost to take out the district's rubbish to Bonnie Glen, and then there was a question of transport. Now, at that meeting, it was mentioned that 450,000 will come off or go onto the rates, and the rest will come out as borrowing. Now, the borrowing then comes to $20 million. I'm not an accountant, as I said. The figures that I mentioned there don't mention then the $20 million. And I don't understand. As I said, I'm not an accountant. So where does the $20 million that you borrowed come into this equation? And then how is that then reconciled between the annual report and the annual plan and the annual report? Because how you present that information is in conflict with each other. I, as a layperson, cannot look at the annual plan and then reconcile the annual report with the way that they don't match up. So, if there's any questions, please help me.
It almost looks like, Graham, that we need to arrange an appointment with you for the Chief Financial Officer and anyone else that wants to be there so that it can be explained properly. We don't have probably the time to do it now, but I think there's a fairly good and easy explanation for that, what you're asking. Okay? Thank you. Sorry, there is a question for you.
No, just about that. Whilst you'll be able to have your answer to your question now that you've raised it publicly, others might want to know the answer too. So, will that be relayed back to them?
I'm sure that can be made possible through our, if we put it on a monitoring report or actions to follow from this meeting, that we can do that. Yes.
Mayor Burney, we can also put it through the Ratepayers Association website. Okay, thank you.
Okay, moving to item 8.1, which is the elected members' remuneration and allowances report. I'll move that this report be received. 2.1, 2.2. Could I have a seconder for that? Councillor Allen, all those in favour? Carried. Carried. So this recommendation 2.3 that the Horowhenua District Council note the following remuneration rate for elected members for 2022-23 to apply from 1 July 2022. Are there any questions? There's no debate as such. This, as we know, is set by central government. Councillor Casey.
Yeah, I just have a question on regarding page 17. I brought it up previously around the elected members in childcare, and I was just looking at the way we've worded it on page 17 compared to the remuneration had put it as allowance is capped at a maximum of 6k per annum per child under the age of 14 years, and we don't reflect that in our wording on page 17. Is there a reason for that?
Sorry, can we just get to that next, because that's 2.4.
Okay.
We'll just deal with the noting of 2.3 first, and then we'll come back to that. Any questions around 2.3? Okay, move the recommendation that we note that. All those in favour? Oh, sorry, can I have a seconder? Councillor Jennings, all those in favour? Against? Carried. Okay, 2.4. That the Horowhenua District Council notes the updates to the elected members' allowances and recovery of expenses policy and adopts the amended policy accordingly. So, Councillor Kay Simmons, just want to repeat that question, please.
Yeah, sorry about that. I was a bit quick. Like I said, in regards to page 17, around that with the wording, so the wording that other councils have used when they're reflecting that allowance payment or opportunity is that they're saying the allowance is capped at a maximum of 6k per annum per child under the age of 14 years, and that's not reflected in our wording on page 17. So is there a reason for that?
Through the chair, I can only imagine that when this item was brought to council and it was debated, you would have been given options, and obviously those options would have been that it could be per child or it could have been per member. The remuneration authority is what gives you kind of the maximum, and obviously this council, in considering that policy, wanted to I suppose minimise the potential cost by giving a maximum per elected member.
Councillor Bishop.
Yeah, and further to that, I remember the debate, because at the time I had a significant number of children under the age of 14 and wanted to signal that by no way did I want multiples of $6,000 or $6,000 at all. And I think it was decided at that meeting that was going to be the cap.
I think your recollection is correct. It was. Any further clarification needed? Therefore, I will move that recommendation. Could I have a seconder? Councillor Bishop. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. So we now move to 9.1, the Annual Plan 2022-23 adoption. So we have, I'll do these in separate bits. Yes, but while I'll move 3.1 and 3.2 that the annual plan report be received. Moved by Deputy Mayor Mason, seconded by Councillor Bishop. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Welcome Jacinta, welcome Caro. So thank you for this, and over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. We're pleased to be here today bringing the Annual Plan 2022-23 to you for consideration for adoption. The Annual Plan you're considering today is Year 2 of the Long-Term Plan 2021-2041. It has been developed with considerable time from yourselves, put in particular to understanding the underspend in the CAPEX program, and the impacts of supply chain delays and labour shortages on delivery of the capital program. Taking those impacts into account and ongoing impacts they are likely to have, what has been presented here is a more realistic plan for the year ahead. Today's decision is about adopting this annual plan. It includes an average rates increase of 7%, which is lower than the 7.4% forecast for this year in the LTP. We note that the actual rate increase will vary depending where in the district people live and the type of property they have. And the level of detail that you have on this page here will be the level of detail that is contained in the document. The total capital program outlined in the annual plan is $45.9 million. It's important to note that we are only seeking to fund $35 million for the year, and if we are seeking more, we will come back to Council for approval. Looking ahead, it has become clear that the impacts of the CAPEX underspend will be ongoing, so Council is committing to a long-term plan amendment for 2023-24. As part of this, the revenue and financing policy will be reviewed because we've learned that the annual plan is not fully compliant with that policy. Thank you, and would welcome any questions.
May I just make one quick mention in regards to Mr. Lindsay's question? Absolutely, we have all that information ready to hand on the screen, so it's something that's easy to discuss. But in general terms, we start with the borrowings that we predict that we had as of the annual report last year, that is audited, and then we work through based on the forecast of what we think we're going to spend in capital this year, what's going to change in terms of that capital program and how much we're going to spend, any grants we receive, any change in terms of what we think we're going to need to fund operationally through borrowings in this current financial year, which we discussed through the FAR program. And then when we set the annual plan this year, we then work through any changes that we expect in terms of borrowings, capital, grants, and any other debt that we need to fund operational costs such as the landfill that we discussed. So more than happy to work through that in detail.
Any questions or clarifications sought by councillors? Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. Just for the public's knowledge, you've said that we're not totally compliant with the financing and revenue policy. So could you just explain so that people understand what you mean, please?
Sure. So as part of one of the key funding policies that this council has is a policy called the Revenue and Financing Policy, and what that does is generally reviewed as part of the long-term plan process. When the long-term plan was set last time, it wasn't reviewed in detail. It is ready for a detailed review. I'll just pick one as an example because that may come up in conversation today, but for example, the building area. This council makes a decision when it reviews the Revenue and Financing Policy of who benefits from that activity and therefore who should pay for it. And as part of that process sets a guide in terms of how much, for the cost of that activity, what portion of it should be funded by fees and charges or grants, and what portion of it should be funded by rates. That's a guide in terms of how the council sets its fees and charges and sets rates going forward. As is outlined in the paper, in some instances, and this has occurred particularly in areas where we've had a significant change in the volumes that we've experienced in the building and regulatory area, because we have had a significant increase in the level of revenue that we've received, we are actually receiving more income through fees and charges than we have anticipated or set as part of the policy for the building and the resource consent area. So what that means is there's less rates coming in the door for that, and more fees coming in the door. So when we review the policy as part of the amendment to the long-term plan, the council would reassess, have there been any changes in terms of who benefits and who pays? Based on the volumes that we have, are there any changes we need to make in terms of the split, in terms of what is fees and what is rates?
Councillor Bishop. Thank you, and I'll take your prompt, Jacinta, and talk to some of that, what you've said. Delighted that, not before time, that 3.5 Council commits to a full review of the revenue and financing policy, and it has been and thank you for your answers to the questions that you've sent through. It has been a bit of an eye-opener of very recent weeks where we've had some information come which I feel really uneasy about. Certainly given this in the building consenting area where over the last 4 years significant fees have been paid which haven't gone to cover the service. The surplus is, from what I understand, has gone straight through to prop up the rate pool, and it doesn't stay, if you like, ring-fenced within that activity to offset future costs that might come within that activity. My question is, could you give us a best guess of what the total amount out of alignment with the policy we are in this year that we've just had?
So in terms of the if I stick to just the building consent activity, in relation to your question, is it I'll mention it in terms of what is forecast for this year, and then maybe what was the result for 2021. In terms of 2021, the building activity had a net surplus of 200,000. So what that means is there was 200,000 additional income that came in terms of fees. Then there was expenditure in that activity, and that was because of the significant volume that we had in that year. Also for this current financial year, depending on how this last few weeks goes, that could be up to around 650,000 in terms of a surplus, so additional revenue than there was cost in that particular area. And that will be for a number of things like vacancies in the team or other areas, but a predominant reason is the volume of fees that we had come in.
In addition to that, if we were running aligned with our public-private split in our policy, we would be getting a further 20%, 15% out of rates to pay that portion of that activity, which sends that number around $1 million, which is 2.5% of rates. It's a significant misalignment, and given it's gone on for a number of years, I'm really uneasy that that money that is paid for by not the builders of this district, but the homeowners, whether it be a first home buyer or whatever, it's just piling more and more costs onto the already significant rising costs of housing in this district, which we have as a council have made a priority. Now, I want to please ask, how can we treat, or how can we ring fence by way of a resolution that money that is overpaid is not just lost to the general rate? Because if it was the other side, like currently, the dog animal control policy is heavily subsidised by rates, and it just goes through. Yet the activity that is funding significant, we mentioned we've got 1.7% of our rate cut through because of growth. So that's a great contribution from those people who have come to the district. But when do they get a break? They're paying, and we're getting subpar service because of the pressures on the organisation that's trying to staff. And the outcome of all of that is that, well, rest easy, because you're also subsidising rates to the tune of 2.5%. It's just an equation that cannot continue. And I want to consider, and for the table to consider, is there ways that we can find a resolution to align that more closely with the policy, so that the money just doesn't go into the pot and get lost, and thanks very much, because it's now in the general pool.
Thanks. So just one comment. In terms of the paper, under 5.8, in the table that's there, if you look at building consents and resource consents, the language is probably a little softer than it could be, this council may wish to change, but we did indicate that this will be reviewed during 22-23, and decisions may be made to limit fee increases in future and offset this by higher revenue in 2021 and 21-22. So you could absolutely, as part of the revenue financing policy, you can make a decision that if a particular activity has made surpluses in the past that are beyond what it was expected as part of the revenue financing policy, then you absolutely can make decisions to rectify that. If you would like to make that more formal in the resolution as part of adopting the paper today, you can do that as well.
Just wants to respond.
Yeah, through the chair, obviously I just want to acknowledge that the breaches of the revenue and financing policy, that is information that's only become apparent to elected members in the last few weeks. And of course, the situation we find ourselves in is that in the absence of either doing a consultation round or reviewing our revenue and financing policy, we are very limited in terms of the levers we can pull for this annual plan. Councillor Bishop, if you wanted to pursue further kind of the question you just asked of us, I have given our governance advisor just quickly drafted a resolution which might be about you requesting that some advice come back to the table on how we could what's the mechanism in which we could ring fence any future surpluses or deficits before any decisions are made about how we manage our end of year financial results. But I just would want to continue to provide the advice that it's important we look at that in the context of all of our activities, because we do have ups and downs across a range of mostly our regulatory functions.
Thank you, I appreciate that. I'll just add that, it's been common practice and well understood that money that is paid into an activity stays within that activity, like if it's coming through for your water rates, your sewer rates or whatever. But it just seems that there's an anomaly here where, thank you very much, it's come and we've got a wonderful surplus and we shouldn't have, and it just goes into the general rate, and I don't think that's acceptable at all.
In this case, it's important to note we do track all net income or expenditure and borrowings at an activity level. For this particular area though, because the general rate funds any portion of the regulatory activity that it needs to, that's where if there's ups and downs within activities that are funded by the general rate, you can get cross subsidization, but absolutely we do track it at an activity level as well.
Do you want to wait to see what the recommendation is, and then we'll, or if you've got a question around this?
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to get some clarification on this. It's actually related to this particular point, if that's okay.
Right.
I just wondered if, from a plain English perspective, the table on page 23, if you could just go through each of those different activity areas and just confirm, because I don't think people will understand that essentially what these mean is that one group is subsidising another group. So in the case of like building consents, it's the fees and charge payers who are subsidising the rate pool, whereas you get down to health licensing and dog and animal control, where it's the other way around, where rate payers are subsidising dog owners, for example. So that's I don't know if you want to just clarify that, if that's useful.
Sure, that's fine. So if we start with building consents on page 23 of the agenda. So as part of the revenue financing policy, it's indicated that rates should generally fund 10 to 20% of the activity. So from a public-private split perspective, in terms of that policy, what that's saying is there is an element of public good in terms of what the building consent activity does, and therefore it's reasonable, based on that policy, that a portion of the cost should be funded by rates. 10 to 20% is the indication in the policy. At this stage, there is no money in terms of rates that is going towards that. If anything, it's being used to reduce the level of the general rate. that is the same in terms of the resource consent area. In terms of the policy, it is currently set at 30 to 40% of that activity should be funded from rates, and that is through the general rate. Currently for the LTP, 21-22, that was sitting at 14%. In terms of the current annual plan, it's sitting at 9%. So that means there's less rates than would be required otherwise if you went strictly by the policy. In terms of the building policy area, that is 100%. There was a little bit of income coming in that space, and that's why you have a difference. In terms of, it was previously predicted there was going to be no income in that space. There may be some subsidies from government or other income in that space, so that's why that's lower in terms of a rate requirement. Health licensing, the estimate is 65 to 75% through rates. Currently, that is higher, sitting at 84 to 82. I should note in that space, though, the assumptions on where a particular staff member sits can make quite a big difference in terms of this policy. And in this particular case, I think some assumptions around some staffing and where they sit has made that significant difference there, rather than there being something wider. In terms of the dog and animal control, 20 to 30% is expected to come from rates, and at this stage 50 to 58% in that area. But what I will note there as well is previously a number of policies ago, I guess if you would say, they were split where there was a policy and an animal control. And if you look at those two separately, they are actually compliant individually in a general sense. When you join them together, it looks like that policy actually just needs a reset. Lastly, wastewater, 80 to 90% is expected to come through rates. The other portion of that comes from our trade race customers. So looking at this from my perspective is that you would, from what they call, I guess in the policy, an exacerbator pays perspective, so where you do have significant trade race customers, our trade race bylaw, I understand, does need some review as well. We probably have had more volume in terms of trade waste coming in than was anticipated when the policy was last set, and that would be the key reason why there is a discrepancy there.
And if I could just further add, because I understand Councillor Jennings' why you wanted to make sure we were giving that clarification for everyone to understand, the reason why we can't fix that is because some of it would result in a significant change to rates, which would put our rates above and beyond the self-imposed cap that we have on rates as part of the long-term plan. And we're already managing, obviously, the impacts of the change in where our waste is going and the financial impact of that. And so we're trying to juggle a number of things in this annual plan where, in the absence of consultation or an amendment to the LTP, we're trying to balance that.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. And I'd note that some of those things, like the building consents and the resource consents, that percentage changes because of the huge extra volume that we're putting through. But have there been times in the past where it's been the opposite way around, where we've actually anticipated that we would get so much, but we've actually got less and we've had to pick it up with rates?
I think I looked back 5 years today. I think there was 1 year instance where that was the case a little bit, but in general over this last 5 years, I think because we've had the increased activity, that hasn't been the case. If I was to look back further back than 5 years, that may be a different story, but definitely in the last 5 years, the trend has been that it has been receiving more in revenue than has been needed strictly to cover its costs.
Thanks. So would I be correct in saying that when that revenue and financing policy gets changed, it's got to have some flexibility to be able to roll with the numbers that are happening?
Absolutely, and it's not unusual for a council during interim years when a policy is set to make a decision that it's going to operate outside of that for various reasons. For example, the wastewater is a good one. It would be unusual for a council to stop charging trade waste fees because the policy is we're not quite meeting the policy, because the purpose of a of receiving trade waste revenue is to make sure that we're covering the costs of the impact that they have on the pipes. And so it is a balancing act between making sure we monitor what's happening in the market and what's happening in the business environment with which we're in. Yeah.
I'm going to now ask Grayson if he would just put the recommendation that's been proposed to you.
So there's an additional recommendation at 3.10 that the CEO provide advice to a future council meeting on the mechanisms in which activity surpluses and deficits are ring-fenced as part of end-of-year financial results.
Councillor Bishop, are you comfortable with that?
I am, and I hope we never have to enact that, given that we will have such a robust review of our revenue finance policy and continue to keep an eye on it, that we will be within the bands that this council sets to operate within.
So what I might do is actually include that as part of 3.5. So we might have 3.51 as a recommendation, which we've just done as part, so it's part of the finance and revenue policy review. Any further questions or clarifications sought from Cara or Jacinta? Okay.
About the report overall? No, yeah, okay. So, my first question is, well, here's an easy one to start with. 4.7, it says that we made a decision not to consult in February. My recollection is actually end of last year. And why I say, I mean, I obviously did comment in the debate. But I guess if I knew then what I knew a bit later on around our serious under-delivery and underspend of CapEx, I think I may, I'm not saying I would have, might have made a different decision about consulting because of the, well, potential impacts, but certainly implications on other things. So is like you can correct me. Was it February as per 4.7, or was it actually last year?
So councillors will recall that just prior to Christmas there was a briefing with elected members where we indicated that was the direction. The decision that was actually made was the February council meeting. It was the first meeting under the interim chief executive, and it was in the CE's report.
Okay, point taken. My next question then is around briefings and workshops leading to where some of this has landed, because I'm struggling to reconcile perhaps what was said openly in a workshop to now, and so I need your help. And that is, while we're setting a $35 million CapEx program, there was a figure of 28 million is programs, or like a work program ready to go. 21 of that is kind of shovel ready. There's going to be carryovers, things we don't finish in this year that has to be carried over. But at the same time, we're projecting in this plan what was in the LTP of 45.9, 45.2 anyway, 45 million. It's all still in there because I've gone not quite line by line, but I always do. And that's covered in 5.6 on page 22. It reads that in the plan, it's up to, I was right, 45.9 million though the level's been set at 35. Now, I referenced the workshops because there was quite a divide in the discussion, I guess, open discussion. And I thought we were more leaning to a 30-35, yes, but it was more like 28's a sure thing, you can come back for more. But as that reads, it's like we're setting it at 35, you can go up to 45, come back for the difference, up to that amount, but wherein lies the carryover within all of that, plus the LTP amount, and really what is, like it's almost like there's another figure that it's not sitting right for me.
Maybe if I start and then others may wish to jump in. So in terms of the so in the document, as you went through all your lines and the capital budgets that are within each activity, there is a total program in there of 45.9 million in terms of a total budget. This council, though, is only seeking, we are only seeking to fund $35 million of that. If we, as part of the projects for...
It's not clear though, because we don't actually specify within a recommendation that's what it is. We're leaving it open still, or am I wrong? It's still leaving it open for 45.9. Like it's in the commentary, not actually a recommendation that like affirms the council decision of that amount and coming back for the greater.
So that can absolutely be made in clarity in this point. It's a fair point. In terms of when you look at the funding impact statement, and I'll find the page number, that's where we seek a total capital amount in terms of what we're seeking to fund from borrowings for a capital of 35 million. So we're clear in that statement, but it's a good point in terms of the recommendation. We could absolutely be crystal clear in terms of that we are only seeking 35 million. In terms of the borrowings, through the funding impact statement, we are only requesting 35 million through there, and that's outlined in there, but we can be clearer in the recommendation if you would like. So I just mentioned, should we stop on that point before I go further in terms of the CapEx stuff? In terms of the 28 that you mentioned, so that was the amount of the 35 million that we were asking for in terms of funding. 28 was effectively talked about, and we talked about it in the workshop as well. There was detailed planning has been completed on that work, but also we worked through, when you look at Tarika and other projects, some certainty to give you in terms of how we would get from where we have ones that have detailed planning of 28, how we then could give you comfort to get up to the 35. So I do have a slide handy somewhere close of that outline there. When you asked as well in terms of the carry forwards, so as part of the FAR report that will go out to you this evening, at this stage we're expecting around $28 or $29 million that will be completed this year. At this stage, at the end of May, I believe it was 24, close to 25 million that's been completed. For the LTP for the first year, including the carry forwards that were brought forward for this year, we had a full budget this year of $58 million that we could have spent. We're only likely to spend $28 million. So when we're asking for funding for next year, that's along the lines of it's reasonable that we expect we can only complete about $35 million. But in the case that other projects go forward, some other ones change around, that program of up to $45.9 million is asked to stay there so that we do have the flexibility. But if we do spend more than the 35, we do need to come back to you to make sure that that's possible.
And so through the chair, just for absolute clarity, that 45.9 includes the carry forwards from the current year that we have not spent.
And there will be a recommendation that will add around the $35 million as well. Questions? Okay.
I just had sorry, Mayor Bernie. Can I just one more on Sullivan thing? Sorry. Just on your pages, agenda page 38 and 39. It'll be 10 and 11 of the document. You've got a table there, and actually the table features again further in the back, that same table, and a reference to the live-in property, land value, capital value. I just wondered why it wasn't consistent, therefore, when you gave the example of the rates breakdown for the live-in property, 180 land value is the same, but you've done a different capital value home and shown that $58 a week. Just for consistency, would you not do a 530 and then break that down?
And apologies, this wasn't in the full document, but when this page here, we intend to replace what is where you just have one area and one example. We're going to replace it with the full where there's a multiple examples for each one, so that it's got more information. And there is the example there that matches to the one that's in the picture that you referenced.
Councillor Mitchell.
Okay, so just for clarity, I noticed that there's no budget for any strategic land purchases, which I thought there was going to be, but I asked the question about that, whether I missed it or not, and the reply I got was no, there isn't a budget, but if something came up that we really needed to look at, that could be brought to a meeting for a council decision. So I guess that the whole annual plan, the sort of certainty of rates, but like the capital program could increase if we managed to actually get through more than we thought we could get through, and that if something important like a strategic land purchase comes up, we can actually make a decision to actually buy that, and what that will do is put the level of debt up, but it won't alter the rates. So is that pretty much how it works?
That's right. At this stage, in terms of that capital program, we did have so that strategic land budget is effectively, it's been moved out to year 3 because there wasn't an expectation that we were going to need it this next financial year. But absolutely, if something came up, this council could make a decision that it wanted to bring that back into the 22-23 financial year. And effectively, it would mean either we do something else, do that and not do something else to keep the $35 million level the same, or you could make a decision to do a little bit more, and then the budget that is effectively sitting in year 3 would no longer be needed because you've spent the money in year 2 instead.
So I'm just going to ask Grayson to tell us what the recommendation is regarding the $35 million capital spend.
Yeah, the recommendation, a new recommendation reads that Council notes that in adopting the annual plan, Council are endorsing a capital program presenting a more realistic program of $35 million, noting any further funding requirements beyond this require approval of Council.
Meet your intention, Councillor Tukupa. Thank you. Okay. We will get back to that as part of 3.8 when we adopt the annual report, if we adopt the annual report. shall I say? Okay. So, any further questions? All right. I would suggest that you two ladies stay there, please. There might be further questions later on. So we'll now move to 3.3 and 3.4. So 3.3, that in accordance with the annual plan 2022-23, Council notes that after considering the matters set out in section 102 A to D of the Local Government Act 2002, that the annual plan 2022-2023 has projected operating revenues at a level that is sufficient to meet projected operating expenses. And that 3.4, that in accordance with section 102 of the Local Government Act, Council notes that the annual plan 2022-2023 is not fully compliant with Council's current revenue and financing policy as outlined in 5.7 of the report. Can I have a mover and a seconder for those, please? Councillor Allen, seconded Councillor Mitchell. Any clarification, discussion, debate? Put those recommendations then. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. 3.5 and 3.51 will read that Council commits to a full revenue and financing policy review during 2022/23, and 3.51
that the CEO provide advice to a future council meeting on the mechanisms in which activity surpluses and deficits are ring-fenced as part of end-of-year financial results.
Mover and a seconder. Councillor Allen. Councillor Bishop, thank you. Any further debate? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Okay, 3.6. The Council approves implementation of a fine waiver for all late returned library items, including books, DVDs, magazines and other lending items effective from 1 July 2022. To put this on the table, I'll move. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Kay Simmons. Okay, the matter's up for discussion and debate. Certainly. Sorry, Mr. Harvey will be answering any questions if you have any. Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. So I was going to ask, I presume that this is sort of there so that children are not penalised by parents that have overdue library books. First of all, is that the first question?
Through you, Your Worship. It's there so that all aspects of our community aren't penalised from overdue library fines. So yes, children included, but also adults.
I was also going to ask, if a child wants to get their own library card, do they have to have parental permission, or can that be done like through the school, or through a school visit?
Through you, Your Worship. I would need to check that. We do have school visits where there are opportunities for children to get books out, and then we can collect them via the school visit. There are a number of cases where children come in on those school visits that do have their own library cards, and we find that we are unable to issue them books because there is a fine on their card of over $5. And I'm unsure of the age that a child card can get a card without a parental consent.
Okay, so it's just a total clarification. So a child would only not be able to get a book out if they had a fine owing to themselves. It's not a family thing. If the parent had an overdue library book, it wouldn't penalise the child.
if there's a fine on the parent's card that is overdue, and their card is blocked, then they would not be able to issue a library item on behalf of the child. Is that how I understood your question, Greg?
So, through the chair, if the child will only not be able to issue a book if there is a fine on their card, but we can give no assurances because we don't ID people when they issue books that adults wouldn't be using the children's library card. So there's nothing stopping me picking up my children's library card and taking it to the library to issue books out.
Councillor Tukapua.
Just a question. It's related, but not quite as specific to the waiving of fees or not. But we had projected in the LTP to spend almost $500,000 on new library books, but that's been changed, though that same amount of $450,000 is now applied to library inventory, which wasn't there before, so it's almost like a switch. But what is the difference? Might sound like a dumb question, but library inventory.
I understand that the $450,000 is specifically for library books. It's just the way it's been worded in there.
So, Brent, there's a different line for other items that the library's purchasing.
There are other lines for magazines and e-books. Yes, there is, but the book budget is specifically for library books.
So much.
Okay, final specific question. So it says on 517 that on average we get $8,500 a year in overdue fines. Would you know what dollar amount we lose in books never being returned?
Through you, Your Worship, I think the total balance that currently we have of lost books is around $23,000. Just for clarification, the overdue fines is separate to the lost books. We would still be implementing a process to recover for lost books after 4 weeks of the book not being returned.
If you mean, Mason.
Thank you, Your Worship. In further to 5.17, we collect an average of $8,500 in revenue for overdue fines. Have we got an indication of the cost of administering that collection?
Through you, Your Worship, it's difficult to put a cost on it. But each day the library staff are engaging with staff and speaking about on overdue fines. We have a number of users that aren't prescribed to email, so that involves invoicing and chasing up fines and letters. The children's team does spend time going through class visit lists before bookings, before library visits, to ensure that children are able to get books. So that it's difficult to put a dollar figure on it, but it is a considerable amount of time.
If you mean, Mason.
So can I just clarify, the cost of administering it would be well in excess of what we receive in revenue?
That would be, through Your Worship, I'd have to do a bit more digging on that, but I'd say it'd be. I mean, it's $8,500 we get in revenue on average, so the staff time would be. I would suspect, yes, it would be more.
Councillor Case.
Sorry. Just a slightly different question, Brent. If I wanted to access a computer at the library and I had a fine on my own card and I wanted to fill out a job application form or update my CV, would I still be able to do that? Or would that stop the ability for me to access the computer also?
Through your worship, no, you'd still be able to do that. We do have the ability for library-only cards, internet-only cards also. Or you could pay for internet usage.
Okay, so let's kick this off, and I will support this recommendation. I do believe that there is a movement across this country that is now growing to take away the fine issue at our public libraries. And in most cases, those that have done it previously have seen quite an increase in their patronage, quite an increase in the number of books that have been issued, but also have seen quite a significant number of books that have been returned because they thought they were lost to the system, because they didn't want to come back into the libraries because they had fines owing to them. And in some cases, the increased patronage has been as much as 30%. So I am a great believer that we've created these community centres for public use, and to put barriers up to prevent people from using them, especially the younger fraternity. I think that goes against our principles in terms of community involvement. The fines obviously were initially done to try to get library users to bring their books back on time. But really what it does do is have a detrimental effect on those that are already disadvantaged in our community and prevents them from using the facilities. I think that we will see quite positive response from actually taking those fines away. It's not necessarily about the money, because I think with collection of fines and the administration of those fines and the pressure and stress that it puts on staff to try and collect those fines, in fact, that it probably equalises itself out reasonably well. And anything that we can do to support reading and literacy, obviously, I think it's a good thing for our community. So I will support this. Councillor Isaacs, do you wish to speak?
Yes, I do, thank you. I'm totally the opposite, Mayor. I can't support this. I totally disagree with it for a number of reasons. I think there needs to be boundaries across all sorts of things, and this opens a precedent for all sorts of things. What do we do with our parking going forward? What do we do with charging people to go to the swimming pool? It's simple rules that people need to follow for reasons. There's got to be boundaries set somewhere. And if we're just going to let people get away with anarchy or whatever they want to do, I just think I'm totally against it. I think it's the wrong message we're sending. The fines aren't big, but there's got to be a boundary somewhere. Some point you need to learn a lesson or be responsible for your actions. And what we're saying by doing this, if we do it, is that, no, go for your life. There's no real rules. You can do whatever you like. You don't return it. Sorry, I'm totally against it, and I will not be supporting it.
Councillor Bishop.
I'm really looking forward to living in this new world where fines are going to be taken away from us and everything becomes aligned. Now, are we going to be so brave to offer no more fines on late payments or rates? Or is it virtue signalling because we're dealing with just such a small number of $8,000? if we're going to use the same rationale, like has been mentioned, around parking, around rates, and any fees, I can't support the direction of this. Yes, you've quoted some changes of behaviour, and whether or not that's going to be long lasting, history will, or the future will explain that away. But I cannot join the train that's going to change the way in which this society was set upon and take away any consequence for not following some pretty basic rules. They're hardly arduous, and it's not like we are causing a huge imposition on people who come and simply take a library book and not bring it back on time like that. That's the crux of it, right? What an awful imposition to put on people to bring back a book within a set time frame. We've got to stop doing that, don't we? It's just terrible.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, look, I have some sympathy with Councillor Isaacs and Councillor Bishop, and I won't speak very long haggling over $8,500, but it is the issue of the principle of this around consequence. And ultimately, I believe this is important in terms of, or the need for a deterrent or a consequence is important in terms of that turnover of inventory, a fairness aspect. And so during the workshop around the annual plan, I gave a pretty clear signal that I could be persuaded to support this, but I needed absolute clarity over the non-financial consequences of poor borrower history and the consequences of not returning things on time and what that would look like. And because I don't see that in the report, at this stage I am uncomfortable supporting this. So at this stage I won't be, unless there's others around the table that can persuade me otherwise.
Councillor Tukapu.
Yeah, it is just a small amount, but I guess the one thing that, because I hear what's been said and agree about consequences. However, I ask myself, well, who's impacted the most by these late returns? It's actually the next person waiting for that book. So when you talk about fairness, it's for that next person, the next user, in waiting, and do they have to wait 2 weeks or a month for that to be returned? Now, if there's no late penalty, there's probably incentive, not the right word, for them to get it back quicker. So if we weren't going to fine, I think there needs to be a temporary block or like that non-financial consequence, whereas until it's returned, they can't use anything else. But it doesn't say that in here, but that's something that would give me, make me more comfortable because it secures it for the next person. So I'm not sure how you might implement something like that, but just a straight, Can you respond to that, or it's can't happen?
Through your worship, we have the ability to block borrowers if they have, if they're a repeated offender of not returning a book, then their library cards get blocked straight away. Or even if a member of the public takes a book out and doesn't return it by a due date, there's a block put on the card. They can't issue any other books. So there is ways we can manage that. So certainly it's not a case of it's a free-for-all. They can keep issuing books right through and not returning them at all. After 4 weeks, there is the ability to refer them to debt collection agency as well, and the actual invoice, the cost of the book actually goes on the library card, not just the normal fine. So that is often a way that people will return the book rather than pay the $40 for the book or whatever.
Mr. Mayor, can I just ask a follow-up question to Mr. Harvey? just a
Question.
just a question, just following on, which was around. So that policy, that criteria, that framework doesn't exist right now. Is that what you're saying? So we've got an ability to do things, but we haven't put that in place. We haven't put the detail around that, and particularly. I'm thinking, so high demand items, high value items. There's no framework in place that sits alongside. If this decision goes ahead, there's something in place that immediately can be applied.
Through you, Your Worship. No, it is in place. So currently the process is if a person still has an overdue item after 4 weeks, the cost of the book is applied to their card. So that's in place right now. That is happening right now. At that point, they cannot issue any more books out until they've settled their debt or returned the book.
Councillor Kay Simmons.
Yeah, so acknowledging that our libraries are valuable within our communities and that they are there to support learners of all ages. Just want to put it out there that 76 of our New Zealand libraries have already removed fines for young people, children and young people. And up until August last year, 26% of our public libraries have done the same for adults. And it's been a global movement for the last 2 decades. New Zealand and Australia are only just starting to catch up now. So I fully support this option.
Councillor Mitchell.
Thank you. I came here thinking that I would vote against this proposal. I think that I'm comforted by the fact that no book back in 4 weeks, definitely not allowed to take out book, and that people will be pursued for any costs. I'm actually thinking elderly, even versus youth, because there must be elderly people that get sick, not computer literate, probably can't just renew online like I do when I can't get mine back in time, and then cop a fine. So I think I've been persuaded that I'm actually going to vote for, unless someone can persuade me otherwise.
Deputy Mayor Mason.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I agree there need to be rules and boundaries, so I have some sympathy, but I just don't want the first lesson that children learn to be one of a fine for a late library book when it comes to numeracy and literacy. I want us to be much more about positive engagement, and I would rather see the money that's spent phoning people to tell them that their library books are overdue, and positive engagement with whether it be the elderly or whether it be the children, and a much better engagement within our community centres, and that people are taking books and enjoying them and not afraid to return them if it's a few days overdue. They don't feel they have to hide from the library, that they're always welcomed in there. And look, let's face it, if this is a disaster, a future council can reintroduce fines. It's not the end of the world. I really think we need to give it a go and support the recommendation that's before us.
Councillor Allen.
Look, I just want to address the where will it end argument, the consequences one. And I think we have to be careful to debate each of these ideas for their own merits in their own right. So the idea that if we do this, if we waive the fines, why then would we not waive late fees on rates? Why would we not waive parking fees and so on? Simply doesn't stack up. It's about debating the merits of an idea in its own right. And to me, this proposal is grounded in council's wellbeing strategy. There's a mandate for me in council's wellbeing strategy, particularly around that sense of belonging, the sense of being a connected community. That, to me, on balance, mandates this proposal, particularly when we look at the consequences of doing it. And there will still be consequences, as has been outlined tonight. People will be charged if books are damaged or whatever, as you've identified yourself, Mr. Mayor. This is about better engaging our community, not just our youth, but our community generally, in literacy in a country that has a shameful track record at the moment when it comes to literacy and numeracy. Anything we can do to better connect people, not just to works of non-fiction, which are about knowledge, gaining knowledge and opinions and so on, but also the creative side of the brain, works of fiction also, which means that they are better creative thinkers. Anything we can do as a council to support an education sector that seems to me to be failing abysmally at times with that is something to be encouraged. And so I do fully support it, Mr. Mayor, and I think there's been some evidence produced tonight and also in a background paper from Mr. Harvey, and I want to congratulate him on the research he's done for this. The background shows us that to waive fees has consequences which are good, which are about greater use, which are about greater connection and so on. So for those reasons, I totally support the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Kedu.
Kia ora koutou, kei te whakawai te, ki te kaupapa hei mui a tātou. Nā te me, ko te mahi o tātou kaunihera, e te tiaki mai ki tō tātou hāpuri. E pāne ki te literacy and numeracy, me ngā kaupapa whakahirehere o tātou tupuna. And I just want to say that I'm supporting the recommendations for all the reasons of that we've been mentioned tonight, especially around the well-being. You know, I mean, I've come from a teaching background, and how important for me is that our children are able to access, you know, the libraries, and that's happening within Shannon, and these people that go down there, even though it's been locked down for a while because of the flooding. But, you know, we miss our library and we need our libraries, and I want to be able to say that we need to give our people access, you know, these fines that that are necessary. I want them to be removed so that we can we're able to give our people access to all of those benefits that we're providing to our community. Kia ora tātou.
All right. The recommendations on the table then. Can I just have a show of hands for this, please, rather than anything else? So those in favour? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and Ms. Councillor Brannigan as well. Those against? 1, 2. I can't see your hand. Todd, raise your right one. That's better. Thank you. So the motion is carried. Thank you. All right, moving now to 3.7, that the schedule of fees and charges attached as attachment B be adopted as operative fees and charges for the 2022-23 year, effective 1 July 2022. Is there anything you want to add to that? Any questions from any councillors? Councillor Jennings.
Sorry, just to close the loop on something, Jacinta, in terms of page 23, that table with the public good and those percentages, that's on the assumption that the increase in fees and charges proceeds, right?
Yes, it is, but I will clarify in terms of building consents and resource consents, the assumption in there is that they will remain the same as they are for this year. Yeah.
Councillor Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I got on council, we were talking about rates increases and things. We often use the narrative that, look, it's not about the percentage, it's about the actual, the number. And going back to these fees and charges, I know it's a live conversation with myself and the CFO, and I'm hoping to get some more accurate numbers coming forward, but the numbers that I've got at the moment is that, you know, we're near $1 million overcharge in that building consenting fee area, And from what I can see, we've got 400 odd building consent, new building units a year that go through this organisation. If this was small percentages, I wouldn't be having this conversation. But currently, for 400 consents to be throwing or being overcharged or out of alignment with a policy at $1 million, that's $2,500 per consent. Now I know that's going to be massaged down with some overheads thrown in there, but it's a pretty high starting point. And all we see is in our life here at council as fees and charges come in and they increase to try and keep pace with inflation. I'm looking forward to the review of the revenue finance policy, because I can't support this, and it's just too far out of kilter.
Jacinda, can you just clarify something to me? Councillor Bishop refers to a $1 million figure. You referred to a $650,000 figure. Where's the difference lie? I've asked it.
We spoke at the workshop about potential. As part of the final workshop, this council made a decision that there was an extra $450,000 in terms of fees and charges that we made a decision as part of finalising this report, and is included within there, to bring the revenue assumption down in the building consent and the resource consent area by $450,000, and that would then be that would reduce fees and increase borrowings. So that was one decision that was made as part of finalising, and also as part of finalising that what's with you today was the decision to leave fees at the same level as they were as planned for this current, or so the current fees that are being charged for this year. So what that did is had the impact of $450,000 in terms of reducing the fees and increasing the borrowings. If you were to look strictly at taking some of the assumptions around overheads and assuming you get about the same level of revenue as you will this year, in terms of what we're predicting, if you were to look at approximately, because the revenue financing policy is in a range of 10 to 20%, that effectively could be funded by rates, that now that we've made the adjustment for $450,000, there is a potential that there's around $260,000 that could be effectively where too much is being charged through fees than is needed, based on some of the conversation. In terms of some of the numbers that Councillor Bishop's talking about, for this current financial year, if we do finish the year at the same level as we're expecting, then there is about $800,000 that we effectively have recovered through the building consent activity that is in addition to, that is in excess of the expenditure that we have. So absolutely, it's part of the recommendation of, and part of the conversations that you'll have around that revenue financing policy is the discussion about how you seek to use that or whether you seek to use that in ongoing years to balance some of the increases that might be seen in the expenditure side of things. Chief Executive might want to.
And in acknowledging all of that, one of the reasons obviously we've cautioned council and kind of rushing to try and fix it is it's going to take some time for us to get across all the detail. And so the example I would use is that at least $200,000 of that additional income that doesn't come directly to council. It goes through to it's a reflection of our activity, and it goes through to IANZ and MB. So there is, in all of the activities, whether it be building consenting activity or food health, there's always complexity of the budgets, and that's what we need to do through this revenue and financing policy review, is take the time to make sure we all understand what's making up that budget.
That's so much.
Can I just clarify, Jacinda, that there's actually zero building consent increases in the fees this year, aren't there? It's most of the other things around about 2%.
That's right. So they range between 2 and 3%, depending on they're based on the indices that are set by Borough, but absolutely in the building and resource consent area, they've been left constant in terms of what's being charged currently.
Okay, could I then call for a mover and seconder for 3.7? Councillor Allen, second Councillor Mitchell. Topic's now open for debate and discussion. Councillor Tukapua.
Yeah, other than the fact that we're not complying with our revenue and financing policy, I do just want to raise the submitter's, whilst there was only one, submitter's point, which is a really valid one. And I'm going to read it if you don't mind. That, well, we, officers, council, had proposed an increase or actually a combining of that notification and hearing fee into the deposit. But the submitter made a point that on occasion where the application is notified, it doesn't necessarily proceed to a hearing, and therefore the applicant is paying the total cost regardless. So I think that was a really important and valid reason not to proceed, as well as the fact that we're non-compliant. And I just want to thank that submitter for taking the time out to make the point. But yeah, thanks.
No further debate. We will then put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Sorry, Councillor Isaacs, were you against?
No, there's just a delay from when I put my hand up to when it comes on the screen, Bernie.
Okay.
So I'm support.
Thank you. All right, so the motion's, did I call for against? I did. Okay, Councillor Bishop, thank you. And the motion is therefore carried. Thank you. So we now move to 3.8, and there are now two recommendations as part of 3.8. The first being the new recommendation, which I'll just ask Grayson to read, please.
That council notes that in adopting the annual plan, council are endorsing a capital program presenting a more realistic program of $35 million, noting that any further funding requirements beyond this require approval of council.
And including that recommendation, we will 3.81 now will be that council adopts the annual plan 2022/2023 in accordance with section 95 of the Local Government Act. I have a mover in Councillor Allen, a seconder in Councillor Kay Simmons. Any debate or discussion? Put the motion. All those in favour? Against? Councillor Bishop, Councillor Jennings. Thank you. The motion is carried. Therefore, one left is 3.9, that council delegates to the chief executive the authority to make minor editorial changes that arise as part of the publication process for the annual plan 2022/2023. I'll move. Can I have a second? Deputy Mayor Mason. All those in favour? Against? Carried. Thank you. Thank you, Jacinda. Thank you, Caro. Appreciate all the work and answering those questions. And look, I just want to say that we know that we've got significant amount of work in front of us over the next financial year in terms of that revenue and finance policy. When I say we, I think the next council, will have that opportunity to completely review everything, and we know also that we will have a long-term plan amendment. So there is significant work ahead of the next council in terms of that. But I thank you all the work that has gone into adopting this annual plan, and look forward to it being carried out, and also hopefully spending as much money as we want to spend, that the capital program is achievable. So, our next item of business is the procedural motion to exclude the public. So, okay, so we're going to page 227 of our agenda. The following motion is submitted for consideration that the public be excluded from the following parts of the proceedings of the meeting because, and the reason for passing this resolution is that the public conduct of the part of the meeting would be likely to result in the disclosure of information for which good reason for withholding exists under Section 7. The withholding of the information is necessary to enable local authority to carry out without prejudice or disadvantage commercial activities, and the public conduct of the part of the meeting would be likely to result in the disclosure of information for which good reason for withholding exists under Section 7. In addition to that, I would like to recommend that under Standing Order 18.2 that David Roach, the Chair of the Community Board, be permitted to remain for the committee in the committee meeting consideration of item C1 because of his knowledge of the views of the Foxton Community Board will be of assistance in council's consideration of this item. So can I have a Councillor Jennings?
Happy to move that. Could we include Trish in that too, please?
Yeah, happy to do that, yes.
And it's on that basis, happy to move that.
Okay, so we'll include the Chair and Deputy Chair of the Community Board in the discussion. Can I have a seconder for that? Councillor Allen? All those in favour? Thank you.